The smell of red bean stew mingled with the buttery warmth of fresh cornbread. It was Monday evening, and as I worked in the kitchen, I let myself believe tonight might feel like the old days, when my late husband Harold was alive, when my daughter Rachel and I laughed as we set the table, when family still meant comfort. But instead of gratitude, I heard only scoffs. Ugh, it smells weird. My granddaughter Emily wrinkled her nose. My son-in-law Mark leaned against the kitchen island, said, "Cornbread and beans?" "That's poor people's food, Helen. We don't need this anymore." The mocking laughter was harsh and cold. My grandson Josh dipped a spoon into the pot, tasted a bite, then chuckled. Before I could react, he tipped the entire ladle forward, dumping the whole pot into the trash. The clang of metal against the bin rang out, sauce spilling thick and red across the plastic liner, dripping onto the tiled floor. What once smelled of warmth and love now reeked of waste, of something unwanted. I stood frozen, clutching the kitchen towel so tightly my knuckles turned white. My name is Helen Morris. I'm 72 years old, living in Ohio, in the very house my savings once bought for my daughter's family. In that moment, I realized it wasn't just stew they had thrown away. They had cast aside memory, love, and my dignity, without a second thought. And still, they laughed. Subscribe if you like this kind of story. The clang of the stew pot hitting the trash still echoed in my head. Mark brushed off his hands, smirking. Well, that's done. No need to pretend we're in the Great Depression anymore. They all burst into laughter, sharp and careless. Emily glanced at me, her voice half teasing, half cruel. Grandma, none of my friends would touch that stuff. They'd laugh if I told them we had beans for dinner. My chest sank. This girl, she once kissed my hand when I broke off the first piece of cornbread just for her, and now she was more afraid of her friend's mockery than she was grateful for the love on her plate. Josh leaned across the counter, grinning widely. Yeah, Grandma's food is like school cafeteria lunch. Nobody likes it. His laughter was innocent, boyish, but to me it landed heavy, like a hammer blow. Cafeteria lunch. Yes, I remember those days, working as the school treasurer, helping hand out free meals to children who had nothing, forcing myself to smile so they'd feel dignity instead of pity. And now my own grandson used that memory, my quiet service, as a punchline. Mark scrolled through his phone. Let's just get pizza, pepperoni, extra cheese. Something real, not this peasant food. Peasant food. The words cut straight through me. Once, this stew had carried us through bitter winters. My Harold used to call it the food of love, the kind that fed both stomach and soul, but here in the house I helped pay for, it was nothing more than a joke. Emily's eyes lit up. Yes, and can we get garlic bread too? Grandma's cornbread is so dry. My stomach nodded. Dry? I remembered my daughter, as a little girl, begging me to teach her how to bake cornbread so she could brag to her classmates about her mother's recipe. And now she sat there silent, offering no defense. From the corner, my daughter Rachel murmured softly, Mark's just being honest, Mom. The kids don't really eat this kind of food anymore. Josh chimed in again, bouncing with excitement. Don't forget wings. Pizza night isn't pizza night without wings. Their voices overlapped, laughter spilling into the room. Every word they tossed into the air felt like a small, precise cut, not deep enough to kill outright, but sharp enough to peel me away from them, strip by strip, until I was left a stranger in the very family I had raised. I drew in a deep breath. The kitchen still buzzed with talk of pizza, but I couldn't endure it a second longer. Enough, I said, my voice low but steady, cutting through their chatter. You all laugh, but this food, this stew, this cornbread, it built this family. It fed you, Rachel. It kept us warm when times were cold. This isn't just food, it's memory, it's love. The room fell silent for a beat. Then Mark lifted his head, his eyes glinting with mockery. Love doesn't pay the bills, Helen. Times change. We're not poor anymore. We don't need to pretend beans and cornbread are some sacred tradition. I swallowed hard. Pretend? To him, every pot I stirred, every table I set, every sacrifice I made, was it all just pretense? Rachel kept her gaze lowered, her voice so faint it nearly disappeared. Mom. Maybe Mark's right. The kids don't eat like this anymore. It's just, times are different. I turned to her, my heart sinking. This was the girl who once begged me to save the recipe for the stew, who swore she'd pass it on to her own children. And now she spoke of different times as if memories could be tossed aside as easily as garbage. Emily folded her arms, her voice firm, brimming with teenage certainty. "Grandma, pizza is better. People move on. Nobody wants old-fashioned food anymore." I looked at her, and for the first time I saw Mark's expression staring back at me, cold, dismissive, certain in its shallowness. Move on. Since when did moving on mean cutting off your roots? Since when did it mean discarding the hands that raised you? Mark leaned forward, planting his palms firmly on the counter. His voice sharpened, final. "Helen, you should be thankful you even have a roof over your head. Stop acting like this house or your beans mean anything." The words knocked the air out of me. Thankful? Has he forgotten? It was my money that helped buy this roof. I'm not some freeloader clinging to their generosity. I paid with my savings, my sacrifices, my years of quiet labor, and now I should be grateful to sit here and watch the food I made thrown into the trash. Inside me, pain twisted and hardened into something else, something cold, unwavering. If they see me as a burden, if the love I've given is nothing more than a joke to them, then perhaps it's time I showed them that silence does not mean weakness. I said nothing more. I only tightened the dish towel in my fists until my knuckles burned, then turned away. Behind me, they were already back to their talk of pizza, garlic bread, and wings. With each step I took out of that kitchen, the bitterness in me cooled into something sharper, an unspoken resolve, steel beneath the quiet. In the beginning, it was different. When we first moved into this house, the walls still smelled of fresh paint. The floors creaked with a newness that hadn't yet learned our footsteps. And for a while, it felt like a promise kept. Rachel hugged me tight in the doorway that first night. "Mom, this house wouldn't exist without you. We'll never forget that." Even Mark, stiff as he was, placed a hand on my shoulder. His voice carried a rare softness. "You're part of this home, Helen. Always." And I wanted to believe them. So I did. They let me cook in those days. The kitchen was mine again. I filled it with the smell of roast chicken, biscuits rising golden in the oven, and pies cooling on the windowsill. I woke early to pack lunches, stayed late to stir pots of stew on the stove. Rachel would kiss my cheek, the children would cheer when they came home from school and smelled supper waiting. Josh used to sit on the counter while I kneaded dough, his small fingers sneaking pinches of flour to make me laugh. Emily would curl up at the table with her homework while I stirred soup, the soft scratch of her pencil blending with the bubbling on the stove. For the first time since Harold died, I didn't feel alone. I told myself the money was well spent, every penny worth it. I told myself this was my reward after years of sacrifice, that I had traded an empty house full of memories for a living, breathing home filled with laughter. And in those early days, it seemed true. I would stand at the sink looking out the window at the children playing in the yard and feel Harold beside me in spirit. As if he were whispering, "You did right, Helen. You found your place again." I held on to that. I clung to it like a lifeline. After all the loss, all the hollow nights spent alone, I had been given a second chance at family, and back then, I believed it would last. It didn't happen all at once. No, cruelty rarely does. It seeps in slowly, drop by drop, until the water you're standing in turns scalding, and you wonder when the burn began. At first, it was subtle. Mark would clap his hand against the door frame, surveying the living room like a man admiring his kingdom. "Beautiful place," he'd say, his voice just a little too loud. "Can't believe we finally own it." The first time, I smiled politely, but as the words repeated over and over, "We own it," a seed of doubt grew in me. Because hadn't I given everything to make it possible? My savings, Harold's life insurance, the very roof over my head? Yet he spoke as though the house had sprung fully formed from his own sweat and pride. Rachel heard it too. I saw the flicker in her eyes. But she never contradicted him. She lowered her gaze, folded laundry, stirred coffee, anything to avoid stepping into the storm. That silence hurt more than the words. When did my daughter forget how to stand beside me? Then the children began to change. Emily, once eager to help me peel apples for pie, wrinkled her nose at my casseroles. "Grandma, nobody eats like this anymore. Can't we just order takeout like normal people?" Josh, who used to sneak cookie dough from my mixing bowl, laughed one night and called my stew slop. I bit my tongue. I told myself they were just children, picking up phrases from TV, from school. But deep inside, I knew where those words came from. Children learn cruelty by watching it practiced. and every time they turned up their noses, I was pulled back into memory of years when I had nothing but beans and bread to feed them. Years when Harold and I skipped meals so Rachel could eat. I remembered standing in a grocery line with food stamps, my hands trembling as I prayed the cashier wouldn't look at me with pity. I remembered mending Rachel's coat in the dead of winter, patching the same sleeve for the third time because we couldn't afford a new one. And now? Now those same sacrifices had been rewritten as shame. My love, poured into meals that once kept them alive, was reduced to a punchline. The curtain had lifted, and behind it, gratitude was gone, replaced by the cold sneer of entitlement. The family dinners I once knew, plates laid out, silverware polished, a tablecloth spread across the dining room, became relics of the past. Now, every evening revolved around the kitchen island, cluttered with cardboard and plastic. One night, it was cartons of Chinese takeout, glossy noodles tangled with shrimp. The next, grease-stained bags from a burger joint, fries spilling onto the counter. Some nights, sushi, rolls lined up in flimsy black trays, wasabi smeared on the edge. Other times, boxes of tacos, the smell of cumin and cheese sharp in the air. The food came from everywhere, different countries, different kitchens, but never from mine. And always the same scene. Mark with a beer in hand, the kids scrolling on their phones between bites, Rachel hovering just enough to keep the peace. No plates, no table, just fingers dipping into boxes, voices loud, laughter bouncing off the walls. I learned to come downstairs late, to wait until I was sure the noise had faded. I would step into the kitchen to find only scraps, half-empty soda cans, sauce packets torn open, paper boxes collapsed into themselves. The counters were smeared with grease, the sink piled high with trash. Sometimes there was nothing at all, just silence. The dishwasher is humming, my place forgotten. One night I came down and found the island still warm with the heat of their meal. The smell of garlic bread hung in the air, rich and taunting. 4 plates had been used, 4, not 5. No one had called me. I stood there in the doorway, staring at the evidence of a meal I hadn't been invited to, my chest tightening until I could barely breathe. When did I become invisible in my own family? When did the seat at the table I once earned with years of sacrifice simply vanish? And yet, I said nothing. I cleaned up quietly, as though my silence could patch over the wound. But silence doesn't heal, it festers. Which is how we arrived here, this night, this kitchen, the smell of my stew rising into the air, only to be met with laughter, Emily's sneer. Josh tipped the pot into the trash. Mark is calling it peasant food. The moment when all the little humiliations piled high enough to crush the last of my patience. The moment I realized they hadn't just thrown away my dinner, they had thrown me away. The family dinners I once knew, plates laid out, silverware polished, a tablecloth stretched across the dining room, were gone. Now they circled the kitchen island like strangers in a train station, each with their own box of food. One night, it was cartons of Chinese takeout, glossy noodles clinging to chopsticks. The next, paper bags of cheeseburgers and fries were spilling salt across the counter. Some nights, sushi, lined in black trays with wasabi smeared at the edges. Other times, tacos wrapped in foil, cumin and grease thick in the air. The food came from everywhere, different kitchens, different countries, but never from mine. And always the same picture. Mark with a beer, Emily snapping photos for her phone, Josh licking sauce from his fingers, Rachel hovering quietly in the background. No plates, no table, just boxes, laughter, and the sharp scent of food I hadn't made. I learned to come down late, to wait until the chatter faded. Most nights I found only scraps, half-empty soda cans, crushed containers, sauce stains bleeding into the wood. Sometimes there was nothing at all, just the low hum of the dishwasher and the faint smell of grease. Once, I walked in to find the island still warm from their meal. Garlic bread sat half-eaten in its foil, and 4 plates smeared with sauce were stacked by the sink. 4, not 5. No one had called me. I stood there staring, my chest tightening until it hurt to breathe. When did I stop being part of the family? When did my place at the table vanish as though I had never earned it at all? And still I said nothing. I cleaned quietly, as if silence could mend the wound. But silence doesn't heal, it festers. Which is how we arrived here, this night, this kitchen. My stew is simmering on the stove and cornbread is fresh from the oven, and Mark's voice cutting through the air like a blade. Cornbread and beans? That's poor people's food, Helen. We don't need this anymore. Emily wrinkled her nose. Josh tipped the pot into the trash, laughing as the stew splattered against the bag. The smell of beans and cornbread, my memory, my labor, my love, swallowed whole by waste. That was the moment, the breaking point. The night I understood they hadn't just thrown away my dinner. They had thrown me away. You live here like a ghost, Mom? You need to stop taking everything so seriously. That's how Rachel greeted me when I finally found the courage to speak. No good morning, no gentle tone, just those words, slipping out like she'd rehearsed them. I stood there staring at my daughter, the same girl who once cried into my apron when the neighborhood kids teased her. Now she looked at me like I was a problem to manage. I drew in a breath, steadied my voice. Rachel, last night hurt me. The stew, the way they laughed. I can't pretend it didn't. Her hands froze on the mug she was drying, then moved again, quicker this time, as if she could scrub her way out of the conversation. They didn't mean it, Mom. You know how kids are. Mark, he just has a different way of showing things. Different way? My thoughts burned, sharp and bitter. Since when did ridicule become a different way? Since when did silence at my expense count as love? I stepped closer, lowering my tone. Rachel, I've spent years cooking for this family, loving this family. I've earned at least a little respect. Her shoulders stiffened. She kept her eyes on the counter, not on me. Mom, please don't make this bigger than it is. We're fine. You're fine. Let's not stir things up. Fine? I almost laughed. Is that what she calls this? Me eating cold bread upstairs while they feast on pizza downstairs? Me erased from birthdays, from dinners, from their laughter? Fine? The kettle clicked behind us, filling the silence. I remembered when that same kettle was Rachel's favorite sound, when she was little, waiting for hot cocoa after school, feet swinging beneath the table while Harold teased her about her messy handwriting. Those days were gone, replaced by the stiff woman in front of me, who couldn't even look me in the eye. I tried once more. Rachel, I'm not asking for much. Just don't let them treat me like I'm invisible. Her face pinched with discomfort, her voice low and hurried. Mom, you're reading too much into this. The kids love you, Mark loves you, but you can't expect everything to be the way it used to be. And there it was. The softest blade slid neatly between my ribs. Not the way it used to be, as if love had an expiration date, as if respect were a luxury item too expensive to carry into the present. She hadn't been cruel, but her silence, her refusal to stand with me cut deeper than any insult. And for the first time, I wondered if Harold had been wrong. Maybe people don't just change slowly with time. Maybe sometimes they choose silence, and in doing so, they choose to let someone else disappear. Stop expecting everything to revolve around you, Mom. Around me? I wanted to laugh. When was the last time anything revolved around me in this house? When was the last time I was even invited to sit at the table? I steadied my voice. Rachel, I'm not asking to be the center. I'm asking to be seen. There's a difference. Her face flushed. She set the mug down with a clatter. Mark's under enough stress without you complaining about dinners and... She stopped herself, but the words had already cut free. Dinners and... what? My life? My dignity? I stepped closer. Stress? You think stress gives him the right to laugh while your children throw away the food I cook? To sit silent while they mock me? Her lips pressed tight for a moment. You live here because we let you, Mom. Don't forget that. The words rang in my ears like church bells tolling at a funeral. Because you let me, so that was it. The truth finally spoken aloud. Not family, not home. Just a guest tolerated until I became inconvenient. My throat burned, but I forced my voice steady. No, Rachel. You live here because I let you. Because I sold my home, because I gave my savings, because I signed over everything so your children could have a bigger yard. Don't twist this. Don't erase what I gave. Her eyes flashed, torn between guilt and defiance. Mark and I worked for this house too. You can't just throw that in my face every time. I cut her off, the anger in me finally breaking through. Worked? You think I didn't work? Every dollar I saved was bought with years of double shifts, with nights Harold and I went without so you could eat. This house exists because of me. And now you stand there telling me I should be grateful just to stay in it? The silence that followed was heavier than shouting. Rachel looked away first, her shoulders collapsing inward, the fight leaving her in a rush of shallow breath, and I knew then. She wouldn't choose me. She would choose her marriage, her comfort, her silence every time. I turned away before the tears could come. So this is what it means to grow old in your child's house. Not warmth, not belonging, just tolerance until they decide you've outlived your welcome. But beneath the ache, something harder began to stir. If they will not defend me, then I will defend myself. I climbed the stairs slowly, each step heavier than the last. Behind me, the house hummed with its familiar noise, laughter, clattering dishes, the hum of a television, but it no longer felt like a home. It felt like a stage where I had been cast as a silent extra, tolerated only until the scene was done. In my room, the air was still, scented faintly with lavender from the sachet I kept in the dresser. My sanctuary, my prison. I sat on the edge of the bed, my hands trembling, not with weakness, but with the weight of what I was about to face. I reached into the nightstand drawer and pulled out the thick envelope. Inside, crisp and cold, lay the loan agreement, the lien attached to this house. My handwriting, my signature, the paper trail of every sacrifice Harold and I had ever made. I ran my fingers over the ink, the seal, the numbers that had once been my entire future, my savings, my security, my life. For years, I had told myself respect could be earned through patience, that love could survive neglect if I simply gave enough of it. I swallowed the small cruelties, the empty takeout boxes I found stacked high while I ate a slice of stale bread. The birthdays forgotten, candles never lit for me. The way they rolled their eyes when I asked to join a family outing, as if I were a child begging for scraps of attention. The silence at the dinner table, where my presence was treated as clutter. I endured it. I folded myself smaller, quieter, until I became the ghost they wanted. But ghosts, I realize now, still have shadows. And shadows can stretch long enough to remind people where the light comes from. I pressed the papers flat against my lap, my heartbeat steady now, no longer frantic. These were not just documents, they were my proof, my shield, my voice, written in ink they could not erase. They think they let me stay, I whispered into the still room, Harold's photo watching from the nightstand. But all this time it was me who let them. The thought burned through me, sharp and clean, sweeping away the last trace of self-doubt. I had spent too long waiting for respect to be given. It would never come. So I would take it. Not with shouting, not with begging, but with the quiet strength of a woman who had carried this family through storms before. I folded the envelope shut, slid it into my bag, and smoothed the quilt across the bed. Tomorrow this house will begin to remember my name. The next morning, I woke before dawn. I dressed carefully, gray slacks, a pressed blouse, the cardigan Harold always said made me look strong. By the time the clock struck 8, I was standing in front of a brick building downtown, its windows fogged from the early chill. The brass letters on the door read Grayson and Bell, attorneys at law. I had walked past this office countless times in the years since Harold died, always telling myself, not today, maybe tomorrow, but today had finally come. Inside, the air smelled of paper and dust, the quiet hum of typewriters filling the hall. Mrs. Harper, the secretary, looked up with a warm but startled smile. "Mrs. Helen? I wasn't sure I'd ever see you come back." "I wasn't sure either," I admitted, my voice steady. "But I'm ready now. I need to see Mr. Grayson." A few minutes later, I was seated across from him at the same oak desk where, years ago, he had prepared the loan papers between me and Rachel. He looked older, hair grayer, but his eyes were just as sharp. "You've kept the lien all these years," he said after scanning the envelope I slid across the desk. "That was wise. It means you still have legal leverage." Leverage. Such a cold word, yet it felt like armor. I straightened in my chair. "I want to issue an eviction notice. 30 days. No loopholes, no extensions. It must come from you, not me. It has to be official." He hesitated, his brow furrowing. "Helen, are you certain? These are your daughter and grandchildren. Once this notice is served, there's no taking it back. Under state law, they'll have exactly 30 days to vacate, or I'll have to file a forcible entry and detainer action. It's a heavy step." I met his gaze, unflinching. They laughed as they threw my food in the trash. They've laughed at me for years. "I'm not asking anymore, Mr. Grayson. I'm telling. Draft the papers." For a long moment he studied me, perhaps looking for the hesitation he expected from an old woman. But I had none left. Finally he nodded. "Very well. 30 days to vacate. I'll prepare the notice and have a process server deliver it. Or, if you prefer, you may deliver it yourself." My fingers tightened on the edge of the desk. I'll deliver it. They need to hear it from me. An hour later, I left the office with a manila folder tucked under my arm. Inside, stamped and signed, was my voice in legal ink. I didn't stop there. At the bank, I asked to speak privately with the manager. I removed Rachel's name from the small joint account she once convinced me to open, for convenience, she had said. I opened a new account in my name only, every detail confidential. No more quiet siphoning, no more access. By noon, I walked out into the sharp autumn air, my bag heavier with papers, but my heart lighter than it had been in years. The streets bustled with ordinary life, cars, shop windows, the scent of fresh bread from the bakery. For everyone else, it was just another day. But for me, it was the first day in a long time that I no longer felt powerless. The next morning, I woke before dawn. I dressed carefully, gray slacks, a pressed blouse. The cardigan Harold always said made me look strong. By the time the clock struck 8, I was standing in front of a brick building downtown, its windows fogged from the early chill. The brass letters on the door read Grayson and Bell, attorneys at law. I had walked past this office countless times in the years since Harold died, always telling myself, not today, maybe tomorrow. But today had finally come. Inside, the air smelled of paper and dust, the quiet hum of typewriters filling the hall. Mrs. Harper, the secretary, looked up with a warm but startled smile. "Mrs. Helen, I wasn't sure I'd ever see you come back." "I wasn't sure either," I admitted, my voice steady. "But I'm ready now. I need to see Mr. Grayson." A few minutes later, I was seated across from him at the same oak desk where, years ago, he had prepared the loan papers between me and Rachel. He looked older, hair grayer, but his eyes were just as sharp. "You've kept the lean all these years," he said after scanning the envelope I slid across the desk. "That was wise. It means you still have legal leverage." Leverage. Such a cold word, yet it felt like armor. I straightened in my chair. "I want to issue an eviction notice. 30 days. No loopholes, no extensions. It must come from you, not me. It has to be official." He hesitated, his brow furrowing. "Helen, are you certain? These are your daughter and grandchildren. Once this notice is served, there's no taking it back. Under state law, they'll have exactly 30 days to vacate, or I'll have to file a forcible entry and detainer action. It's a heavy step." I met his gaze, unflinching. They laughed as they threw my food in the trash. They've laughed at me for years. "I'm not asking anymore, Mr. Grayson, I'm telling. Draft the papers." For a long moment he studied me, perhaps looking for the hesitation he expected from an old woman, but I had none left. Finally he nodded. "Very well, 30 days to vacate. I'll prepare the notice and have a process server deliver it, or if you prefer, you may deliver it yourself." My fingers tightened on the edge of the desk. "I'll deliver it. They need to hear it from me." An hour later, I left the office with a manila folder tucked under my arm. Inside, stamped and signed, was my voice in legal ink. I didn't stop there. At the bank, I asked to speak privately with the manager. I removed Rachel's name from the small joint account she once convinced me to open, for convenience, she had said. I opened a new account in my name only, every detail confidential. No more quiet siphoning, no more access. By noon, I walked out into the sharp autumn air, my bag heavier with papers, but my heart lighter than it had been in years. The streets bustled with ordinary life. Cars, shop windows, the scent of fresh bread from the bakery. For everyone else, it was just another day. But for me, it was the first day in a long time that I no longer felt powerless. The TV blared a canned laugh track as the family lounged in the living room. Pizza boxes and soda cans crowded the coffee table, grease soaking into the cardboard. Emily scrolled her phone with one hand. Josh fought for the last chicken wing. Mark leaned back with a beer, and Rachel sat quietly beside him. I stepped in, envelope in hand. The sound of my shoes on the hardwood drew only a glance from Rachel. Mark didn't bother looking. I set the envelope on the table, sliding it between the pizza boxes. "Read it." Mark smirked, his eyes still on the TV. "What is this, Helen? Another recipe card? Don't tell me it's more beans." Laughter rippled from the kids. Emily giggled. Josh snorted. Rachel pressed her lips together, not joining in, not stopping them either. "Read it," I repeated, my voice even, flat as stone. Mark grabbed the envelope, tearing it open with exaggerated flair. He held the paper up, eyes scanning casually, until the words sank in. His smirk faltered. Color drained from his face. What is this supposed to mean? His voice rose, no longer amused. It means, I said, my tone calm but cutting, you have 30 days to vacate this house. Emily blinked, confused. Wait, what? Josh leaned forward. Grandma, is this a joke? Mark slammed the paper onto the table. An eviction notice? Are you out of your mind? You can't do this. I met his eyes steady. I can, and I have. His jaw tightened, voice hardening with the edge of panic. This is our house. We bought it. We pay the bills. You bought it with my money, I shot back. My savings. My husband's life insurance. Without me, you wouldn't have a single brick to argue over. Don't pretend otherwise. Rachel flinched, her hands twisting in her lap. Mom, please. I turned to her, my voice soft but unyielding. Rachel, I trusted you. I believed when you said I'd always have a place here. But you've let them laugh at me, mock me, erase me. That promise is broken. Now I am the one who decides. Mark leaned forward, his voice nearly a shout. You think you can throw your own family into the street? Your grandkids? They're not children anymore, I said firmly, my gaze flicking to Emily and Josh. Old enough to laugh at me, old enough to understand the consequences. This house is mine, always was. I only lent it to you, and now I'm taking it back. The room went still. The TV laugh track sputtered in the background, absurd against the silence. Mark's face twisted, searching for words, for power, but his voice cracked when he finally spoke. You'll regret this, Helen. I stood straighter, the years of stooping gone from my shoulders. No, Mark, for the first time in years I won't. The room exploded. Emily jumped to her feet, voice shrill. You can't do this. Where are we supposed to go? Josh echoed her, his words tumbling over themselves. Yeah, this is crazy. You're seriously kicking us out? Rachel's face crumpled, tears springing to her eyes as she reached for me. Mom, please don't do this. We can fix this, I swear. Mark's shout cut her off. This is bullshit. He slammed his fist against the coffee table, sending a soda can rolling to the floor. You think you can walk in here and dictate everything? Not in my house. But it wasn't his house, and we both knew it. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't move. I let the storm rage around me until the silence in my chest grew louder than their shouting. When I finally spoke, my words cut through the chaos like glass. It is my house. The law says so. The deed says so. And every dollar that built it came from me. Mark's face reddened, his finger stabbing the air at me. Ungrateful old woman. I raised a hand, steady, commanding. Number enough. I gave and gave until there was nothing left to take. And in return, you laughed at me. You threw my food in the trash. You treated me like a burden in the home I paid for. Rachel sobbed quietly, whispering, Mom, please. But her voice was too thin, swallowed by Mark's anger and the children's confusion. I looked at her, my daughter, the little girl who once clung to my skirt on her first day of school. Rachel, you chose silence. You chose his side. Now I choose mine. The kids fell quiet, sensing the gravity. Even Mark, still trembling with fury, had nothing left to throw but empty threats. I gathered the papers back into the envelope, tucking it under my arm with deliberate calm. You have 30 days, spend them however you like. But when the time is up, this house will no longer be yours to sit in, to eat in, to laugh in. I turned toward the stairs, leaving them in the wreckage of their own noise. Behind me, the room buzzed with whispers, with panic, with anger. But inside me, for the first time in years, there was only clarity. The 30 days began like the tolling of a clock only I could hear. Each morning, each night, the sound of it echoed in my chest. The house changed. Gone were the easy laughs, the careless voices. Now the air was thick with whispers, hurried arguments behind closed doors. Doors slammed more often. The children's voices rose in protest, sharp and indignant. I passed the hallway one evening and heard Emily's muffled sobs. She's ruining everything. My friends can't even come over now. Josh's voice followed, bitter and loud. Yeah, she's crazy. Who kicks their own family out? They thought I couldn't hear, but I did. I heard every word. And still, I did not bend. Boxes began to appear, stacked in corners where photographs used to hang. Connor's posters were peeled from the walls, leaving pale squares on the paint. Liam's sneakers spilled out of a half-packed duffel bag. Rachel's coats disappeared from my closet at last, their space reclaimed by emptiness. Mark moved through the house like a storm contained in a man's body, snapping at the kids, grumbling under his breath, glaring at me when he thought I wouldn't notice. He barked about rent prices, cursed at the cost of moving trucks. Yet every time our eyes met, he looked away first. Rachel shrank smaller by the day. Her voice, once soft with promises, was now hoarse from arguments I wasn't invited to hear. She avoided me, flitting past in silence, her shoulders bent as though the very air weighed on her. And me? I moved through it all like a shadow, but not the kind they had once mocked. No longer invisible, no longer begging for scraps. I was the center of gravity now, the force they had to orbit around, whether they admitted it or not. Every box sealed, every suitcase dragged down the stairs, reminded them what they had lost, and reminded me what I had reclaimed. At night, I sat by my window, the one overlooking Harold's lilacs. Their blossoms stirred in the cold wind, stubborn, fragrant, unyielding. I thought of Harold, of all the nights I wished for his voice to tell me what to do. I could almost hear him now. That's my Maggie, standing tall. And I knew, this house, this life, my dignity, it was mine again. The 30th day arrived without ceremony. No shouting match, no apology is too late. Just the dull scrape of boxes across the floor and the slam of doors that would soon be strangers to them. The house looked hollow, stripped bare where their clutter once pressed against the walls. Pale rectangles marked where Emily's posters had hung. Empty shelves gaped where Rachel's shoes used to spill across the floor. Even the hum of the television felt thinner, desperate, as though it knew its audience was fading. Mark carried boxes with a tight jaw, sweat beading on his forehead, though the air was cool. Every so often his eyes would flick toward me, brimming with words he didn't dare say. Rachel trailed behind, her face ashen, shoulders slumped beneath the weight of what she would not fight for. The children muttered as they hauled their belongings to the car. Emily's voice cracked with anger. I can't believe this. She's ruining everything. Josh kicked the doorframe on his way out. Thanks for nothing, Grandma. But I did not answer, not to their blame, not to their anger. The time for words was long past. At last, the final box was gone. The final door closed. Their voices faded down the street until the silence of the house rose up to meet me. I stood in the center of the living room, the air fresh and still. Not heavy with grease, not filled with mockery, just quiet. My quiet. On the coffee table, a soda can lay forgotten, half empty. I picked it up, carried it to the trash, and let it fall with a sharp metallic clatter. The sound was sharper than it should have been, final in a way that made me smile. That evening I cooked again, not for them, not to prove anything, but for myself. A small roast, seasoned with rosemary from the garden Harold planted. Potatoes, carrots, and cornbread golden at the edges. I set one place at the dining table. A candle flickered in the center, its flame steady. I ate slowly, savoring each bite, each swallow, no longer burdened with humiliation. The house around me was mine again. Mine in name, in spirit, in truth. When the last dish was washed and put away, I stood at the window. The lilacs swayed in the night breeze, their fragrance drifting in through the open pane. They laughed as they threw my food in the trash. I whispered to the darkness, to Harold, to myself. But they will never laugh at me again. And for the first time in years, I went to bed not with bitterness, not with fear, but with peace. Respect is not inherited. It is not gifted like a hand-me-down coat, worn thin and patched until it falls apart. For years, I believed love alone was enough. That patience would teach them kindness, that silence would keep the peace. But silence is a dangerous teacher. It shows people how much they can take and how little they must give. I gave everything, my money, my home, my years. And in return, I became invisible in the very family I had built with my own hands. But invisibility is not weakness. Sometimes, it is only the gathering of strength in the shadows, waiting for the moment to step forward. That moment came with ink on paper, with law on my side, with a voice I had long buried. And when I claimed it, the house remembered me. The walls, the lilacs, the very air, all of it whispered my name again. Respect is never given freely. It must be claimed, defended, and held. I claimed mine. And in the quiet of this house, I will never let it be stolen again.